What happens when a shelter worker carelessly throws away a homeless man's most precious possession, not realizing that Keanu Reeves is volunteering at the shelter? What began as a devastating moment for an elderly homeless man transformed into an extraordinary journey that would change countless lives forever. By the time this true story ends, you'll understand why this simple act of kindness went viral and brought millions of people to tears. Oh, and before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. We love seeing your reactions in the comments. The Hope Harbor Shelter stood as a weathered beacon of compassion in downtown Portland, its brick facade worn by decades of rain and neglect. The building had once been a factory in the 1940s before being converted into a homeless shelter 20 years ago. Inside, the fluorescent lights flickered across the scuffed linoleum floors, casting harsh shadows on institutional green walls decorated with faded motivational posters. On this particular Tuesday in November, the shelter was more crowded than usual. An early cold snap had driven many of the city's homeless population indoors, straining the shelter's already limited resources. Volunteers and staff members rushed between tasks, their faces etched with the particular exhaustion that comes from caring deeply while being perpetually understaffed. Among the residents seeking refuge was 73-year-old Walter Simmons. Unlike many at the shelter, Walter was newly homeless, having lost his modest apartment just 2 months earlier after medical bills from his late wife's cancer treatment depleted his savings. His weathered face told the story of a man who had worked hard his entire life, 42 years at the local lumber mill before it closed, only to find himself with nowhere to go in his twilight years. Walter sat quietly on his assigned cot, a small pile of possessions at his feet. He wore the same flannel shirt and worn work pants he'd had for years, though they hung loosely on his frame now. His hands, strong hands that had once easily handled heavy lumber, trembled slightly as they cradled a tattered Bible bound in faded brown leather. This Bible wasn't just any book. It had been a wedding gift from his wife Margaret, 47 years earlier. Throughout their marriage, Margaret had filled the margins with handwritten notes, reflections on the verses, prayers for specific occasions, little messages of love to Walter. After she passed away 8 months ago, these handwritten notes became his most tangible connection to her memory. Every night Walter would carefully open the Bible to a different page, running his fingers over Margaret's handwriting, finding comfort in her words when he had little else left. In the chaos and indignity of shelter life, this ritual was his anchor to who he had been, who they had been together. At the front desk of the shelter, a new volunteer was checking in. He wore a simple black beanie pulled low over his forehead, a worn jacket, jeans, and work boots. His beard was several days old, and his long hair was tucked behind his ears. To the distracted shelter staff, he was just another volunteer, one of the many kind souls who showed up periodically to help. If they had looked more closely, they might have recognized Keanu Reeves, but he had become skilled at blending in when he wanted to. Keanu had been quietly volunteering at homeless shelters for years, preferring to work anonymously. He found meaningful connection in these spaces, away from the artifice of Hollywood. Today, he had come to Hope Harbor to help serve meals and assist wherever needed. "Thanks for coming in," said Monica, the shelter's overworked director, barely glancing up from her paperwork. "We're short-handed today. Can you help Jake with room cleanup?" Keanu nodded, his voice soft and humble. "Happy to help wherever you need me." Jake, a young staff member in his mid-20s, had been working at the shelter for only 3 weeks. Idealistic but already showing signs of burnout, he led Keanu toward the dormitory area. "We need to clear out personal items from the bunks," Jake explained. "New policy. Everything has to fit in the assigned lockers, or it gets tossed. Too much clutter creates fire hazards and sanitation issues." Keanu frowned slightly. "That seems tough. Some people might have important things that don't fit in a small locker." Jake shrugged, his exhaustion evident. Rules are rules. Director's orders. We're getting citations from the fire marshal. As they entered the dormitory, Keanu noticed Walter sitting on his cot, gently turning the pages of his Bible. The old man's face was so tender, so lost in memory, that Keanu paused to watch him for a moment. There was something in Walter's expression that spoke of profound loss and equally profound love. Jake, however, was moving quickly through the room, pointing out items to be removed. "Sir," he called to Walter, "everything needs to go in your locker. Shelter policy." Walter looked up, startled from his reverie. "Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I'll put my things away." He began carefully placing his few possessions, a change of clothes, a small photo frame, a toothbrush, into the narrow locker beside his cot. Jake noticed the Bible. That, too. Walter hesitated, holding the Bible protectively. "This is very important to me. It was my wife's—" "Sorry, no exceptions," Jake interrupted, already moving to the next cot. "Either it goes in the locker or it has to be discarded." Walter tried to fit the Bible into the locker, but it was too thick to fit alongside his other meager belongings. He looked up at Jake, his eyes pleading. "Please, son. This is all I have left of my Margaret. She wrote notes in it throughout our whole marriage." Jake sighed, the weight of his job, the endless needs, the constant rule enforcement wearing on him. "Look, I don't make the rules. Director says everything needs to be stowed properly." Keanu stepped forward, his voice gentle. "Maybe we could make an exception, or find another solution." But Jake, perhaps feeling his authority challenged in front of residents, stood firm. "No exceptions. That's how we ended up with citations in the first place." He gestured to Walter. "I'll give you 5 minutes to figure it out, but then I have to enforce the policy." As Jake moved away, Keanu knelt beside Walter. "I'm sorry about this. Is there anything I can do to help?" Walter looked at him, gratitude in his eyes for the simple act of being seen. "I appreciate it, son, but rules are rules, I suppose. I just wish—" He trailed off, fingers tracing Margaret's handwriting on a page. "What's your name?" Keanu asked. "Walter. Walter Simmons." "I'm John," Keanu said, using his middle name as he often did when volunteering. "Tell me about your wife, Walter." For a brief moment, Walter's face transformed, years falling away as he spoke. "Margaret was the kindest soul God ever created. Taught 3rd grade for 38 years. Never met a person she couldn't find something to love about." He opened the Bible to show a page where elegant handwriting filled the margin. She wrote notes everywhere. Said it was her conversation with God and with me. Keanu nodded, understanding the value of such a connection. Before he could say more, Jake returned, now with a trash bag in hand. "Time's up," he said, not unkindly, but firmly. "Did you make it fit?" Walter shook his head, defeat in every line of his body. "No, Then I'm sorry, but it has to go." Jake reached for the Bible. "Wait," Keanu interjected. "Maybe there's another solution. Could the shelter keep it somewhere else for him? In an office, maybe?" Jake shook his head. "We don't have the storage space or staff to manage individual item requests. I'm sorry, really I am." His voice suggested he truly was sorry, just a young man trying to do his job in difficult circumstances. Walter, perhaps too accustomed to loss, too tired to fight, reluctantly handed over the Bible. "Could I at least tear out a few pages with her notes? Just to keep?" Jake hesitated, torn between policy and compassion. "I really shouldn't." "The policy is about space and storage," Keanu pointed out. "Surely a few pages." "Fine, quickly," Jake conceded, looking over his shoulder to ensure the director wasn't watching. With trembling hands, Walter opened the Bible to find the most precious notes, but in his distress, the Bible fell from his hands, pages splaying across the floor. As he bent to retrieve it, a sharp pain crossed his face. His arthritis made it difficult to kneel down. "Let me," Keanu said, gathering the fallen Bible. As he did, he noticed the extensive handwritten notes covering nearly every margin. This wasn't just a few special annotations, this was a lifetime of thoughts, prayers, and love. To remove a few pages would be to dismember a complete work, like asking someone to choose which memories of a loved one they could keep. Before Keanu could say anything more, Jake, now under pressure from a call from the front desk, took the Bible from his hands. "I'm sorry. We have to move on. Emergency intake coming in." Without further ceremony, he dropped the Bible into the trash bag and continued through the dormitory. The look on Walter's face was devastating. A man who had lost everything now losing the last tangible connection to his greatest love. He didn't cry out or protest. He simply sat down on his cot, shoulders slumped, eyes fixed on nothing. Keanu stood frozen, witnessing the quiet tragedy. Around them, the shelter continued its busy rhythm, no one else noticing the significance of what had just happened. To everyone else, it was just an old book being discarded for practical reasons. To Walter, it was like losing his wife all over again. In that moment, something resolved in Keanu's eyes. Without drawing attention to himself, he followed Jake, watching as the young staff member tied off the trash bag and carried it to the large dumpster behind the shelter. He made a mental note of the time, 1:42 p.m., and returned to his volunteer duties, his mind already forming a plan. For the rest of the afternoon, Keanu worked alongside other volunteers, serving food, distributing toiletries, and helping with various tasks. But his eyes frequently returned to Walter, who sat motionless on his cot, a man adrift without his anchor. During the dinner service, Keanu brought a tray to Walter, who hadn't moved to join the line. "You should eat something," he said gently, setting the tray beside the older man. Walter looked up, momentarily confused, then nodded in vague recognition. "Thank you. John, wasn't it?" "That's right," Keanu replied, sitting down beside him. "Do you mind if I ask how long you've been staying here?" 2 months and 3 days, Walter answered with the precision of someone counting every day of displacement. "Never thought I'd end up here. Had the same house for 39 years before." He trailed off, the story too painful to complete. "Life can change quickly," Keanu offered. "I've seen it happen to many people." Walter nodded, picking at his food without interest. "That Bible, it was the last thing I had that made me feel like myself, like Walter Simmons, Margaret's husband, not just another old man in a shelter." The raw dignity in his words struck Keanu deeply. He thought of his own journey, the losses he had endured, the times when objects became sacred through their connection to loved ones. He thought of his own spiritual journey, complex and private though it was. "I understand," he said simply, and something in his tone made Walter look up, really seeing him for the first time. "You know, you look familiar," Walter said, squinting slightly. Keanu smiled gently. "I just have one of those faces." He stood, placing a hand briefly on Walter's shoulder. "Try to eat something. I'll check on you tomorrow." As the shelter began to quiet for the night, Keanu slipped out, his volunteer shift complete. But instead of heading home, he walked around to the back of the building, where the large dumpsters stood in the dimly lit parking lot. He glanced around, ensuring no one was watching, then approached the dumpster Jake had used earlier. The task ahead was unpleasant but necessary. Pulling a small flashlight from his pocket, Keanu began to search through the trash bags, looking for the one containing Walter's Bible. The work was messy and undignified, exactly the kind of thing no one would expect a Hollywood star to be doing. But Keanu proceeded methodically, focused on his purpose. After 20 minutes of searching, he realized with sinking heart that the dumpster had already been emptied. The trash collection schedule had been moved up, perhaps due to the shelter's overcrowding. Undeterred, Keanu made his way to his motorcycle parked a few blocks away. He knew the city's waste management procedures from previous charity work. The shelter's trash would be taken to the transfer station before being transported to the landfill. If he hurried, he might be able to intercept it. The Portland transfer station was closing when Keanu arrived. Using a combination of charm and a generous donation to the night supervisor's favorite charity, he gained access to the facility. But the task of finding one trash bag among thousands proved impossible as darkness fell. Returning to his hotel room that night, Keanu made calls, leveraging contacts without revealing his identity. He needed to know where the next day's waste would be sorted, which trucks would carry it, how the system worked in detail. By morning, he had a plan. The next day, as Walter sat listlessly through breakfast at the shelter, Keanu was at the county landfill, having convinced the management to allow him to search through the most recent arrivals from the transfer station. He had brought supplies, gloves, boots, protective clothing, and a determination that surprised even the seasoned waste management workers. "Must be something really valuable," one worker commented as Keanu methodically sorted through bag after bag. "It is to someone," Keanu replied simply. For 6 hours, he searched without success. The Bible seemed to have vanished among the mountains of discarded items, each representing someone's former possession, now deemed worthless. As dusk approached, the landfill supervisor advised him to give up. "Needle in a haystack, man." "Actually, worse than that. At least a needle's metal. You could use a magnet. This is like looking for one specific piece of hay." Keanu nodded his understanding, but asked to try one more section before leaving. This area contained bags that had broken open during transit, their contents now loose among the general debris. It was there, as the sun was setting, casting a golden light across the grim landscape of refuse, that Keanu spotted a flash of worn leather. Kneeling down, he carefully extracted a tattered Bible from where it lay partially buried beneath coffee grounds and discarded packaging. Opening it with reverent hands, he found the margins filled with elegant handwriting, the ink slightly smudged in places but legible. On the inside cover was an inscription. "To my beloved Walter, may these words guide us through our journey together. All my love, Margaret. June 12, 1974. Keanu closed his eyes briefly, overcome with relief and gratitude. Against all odds, he had found it. Clutching the Bible carefully, he made his way back to his vehicle, nodding his thanks to the workers who had accommodated his unusual request. He was filthy, exhausted, and smelled of the landfill, but carried himself with the quiet satisfaction of a mission accomplished. Rather than returning directly to the shelter, Keanu took the Bible to a specialist in book restoration he knew in Portland. The elderly craftsman, though surprised by his late visitor and his appearance, recognized Keanu immediately, but maintained his privacy. "This is in rough shape," the craftsman said, examining the Bible carefully. "Water damage here, torn pages there. But it's salvageable. What makes it so important?" "It's not mine," Keanu explained. "It belongs to a man who has lost everything else. The handwritten notes inside. They're from his late wife." The craftsman nodded, understanding immediately. "Give me until morning. I'll do what I can." Keanu returned at dawn to find the Bible transformed. The leather cover had been carefully cleaned and treated, torn pages repaired with nearly invisible mending tissue, the spine reinforced. The craftsman had even created a custom protective case from acid-free materials. "How much do I owe you?" Keanu asked, examining the careful work. The craftsman shook his head. "Consider it my contribution. We all need something to hold on to." Back at the shelter later that morning, Keanu, once again in his volunteer guise as John, found Walter sitting alone, staring at the wall. The old man seemed to have diminished overnight, as if the loss of the Bible had accelerated his physical decline. Keanu sat beside him, saying nothing at first. Finally, Walter noticed him. "You came back," he said, his voice barely audible. "I said I would," Keanu replied. He reached into his bag and carefully removed the protective case. "I have something for you." Walter's eyes widened as Keanu placed the case in his hands. "What is this?" "Open it," Keanu encouraged, his voice gentle. With trembling fingers, Walter unlatched the case. As he caught sight of the restored Bible inside, his breath caught. He lifted it reverently, opening to a random page where Margaret's handwriting filled the margin. How did you?" Words failed him as tears filled his eyes. "It took a little searching," Keanu said, deliberately understating the effort. "But some things are worth searching for." Walter looked up at him, really seeing him now through his tears. Recognition dawned in his eyes. "You're not just John, are you? You're—" Keanu smiled softly, placing a finger to his lips. "Today, I'm just someone who understands what it means to hold on to what matters." Walter clutched the Bible to his chest, tears flowing freely now. "I don't know how to thank you. This is everything to me." "You don't need to thank me," Keanu replied. "But there is something I'd like to ask you." "Anything," Walter said immediately. "Would you tell me some of the things Margaret wrote? If it's not too personal, I'd like to hear her wisdom." For the next hour, as shelter residents and staff moved around them, Walter read from the pages of the Bible, sharing Margaret's insights on passages, her prayers for their children, her reflections on their life together. Keanu listened intently, occasionally asking questions that revealed his own thoughtful relationship with spirituality. Their conversation was interrupted when Monica, the shelter director, approached with a confused expression. "Excuse me, but are you Keanu Reeves?" Walter looked up in surprise as Keanu nodded, his cover now blown. "I am. I hope it's still okay that I'm volunteering here." Monica blinked rapidly, clearly flustered. Of course, we're honored. I didn't recognize you yesterday." "That was the idea," Keanu said kindly. "I prefer to help quietly." "And he does help," Walter interjected with newfound energy. "Do you know what he did?" He held up the Bible, explaining its significance and how Keanu had returned it to him. As he told the story, other shelter residents gathered around, drawn by the unusual energy in Walter's voice and the presence of a celebrity in their midst. Jake, the young staff member who had discarded the Bible, stood at the edge of the group, his face a mixture of shame and awe. When Walter finished his account, deliberately omitting the detail about the landfill search to protect Keanu's dignity, Jake stepped forward. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Simmons," he said, his young face earnest with regret. "I was just following rules, but I should have found another solution." Keanu interceded gently. "We all do our best with the information we have at the time. The important thing is to learn and grow." Monica, still processing the situation, shook her head in wonder. "Mr. Reeves, I don't know what to say. Your kindness is extraordinary." Keanu seemed uncomfortable with the attention. "Actually, there's something I'd like to discuss with you, if you have a moment. About the shelter." Later that afternoon, Keanu and Monica sat in her small office, discussing the shelter's needs and challenges. The conversation had begun with the issue of personal possessions and storage, but had expanded to broader concerns. "Many of our residents have spiritual or religious items that provide comfort," Monica explained, "but we're so limited in space and resources." "What if that could change?" Keanu asked. "What if the shelter had a dedicated space for spiritual reflection, not just for Christianity, but for all faith traditions represented here?" Monica sighed. "That would be wonderful, but we can barely keep the lights on as it is." "I'd like to help with that," Keanu said simply. "Not just with funding, but with a vision." Over the next 2 hours, they outlined a plan for what would become Hope Harbor's first multi-faith spiritual library and meditation space. Keanu committed to funding the renovation of an unused storage room, the purchase of sacred texts from various traditions, and comfortable furniture for reading and reflection. "The only condition," he said, "is that this remains about the residents, not about me. No naming rights, no publicity." Monica agreed, though she couldn't quite hide her amazement at his generosity and humility. When they emerged from the office, they found Walter sitting with several other residents, reading aloud from Margaret's notes in his Bible. The group, diverse in age, background, and circumstance, listened attentively, finding unexpected connection in the words of a schoolteacher they had never met. Over the next 3 months, the transformation at Hope Harbor was remarkable. The new spiritual library opened with little fanfare but enormous impact. Residents found in it not just religious texts, but a space of dignity and contemplation often missing in shelter environments. Walter, with his gentle manner and profound appreciation for sacred texts, naturally evolved into the space's unofficial librarian. Most remarkably, his relationship with Jake, the young staff member who had discarded his Bible, developed into a genuine friendship. Jake, inspired by Keanu's example of compassion without judgment, began spending his breaks talking with Walter, learning from him, eventually bringing his own questions about faith and meaning to their conversations. On a surprisingly warm day in February, Keanu returned to Hope Harbor. He came without disguise this time, though still without fanfare. The spiritual library was thriving, with comfortable chairs often filled with residents reading, meditating, or simply finding a moment's peace in their difficult circumstances. He found Walter in the main reading area, a small group gathered around him as he shared a passage from his Bible, now supplemented by stories from his own life and Margaret's teachings. At 73, Walter had found a new purpose, his knowledge and compassion offering others the same comfort Margaret's words had given him. Keanu sat quietly at the back, listening as Walter finished his impromptu session. When the group dispersed, Walter spotted him and came over, his face brightening. "There he is," Walter said warmly. "Our guardian angel." Keanu smiled, embracing the older man. "Hardly an angel. Just a friend. How are you, Walter?" "Better than I've been in a long time," Walter replied, gesturing to the space around them. "I have purpose again. And look." He pointed to a small desk near the bookshelves, where a cardboard sign read, "Bible Study with Walter, Tuesdays and Thursdays, 2 p.m. All welcome." "You're teaching now," Keanu observed. "Margaret was the real teacher," Walter said. "I'm just sharing her wisdom, and not just from the Bible." He indicated the diverse array of religious texts on the shelves. "I've been learning about other traditions too. It's all connected, you know." They talked for nearly an hour, Walter sharing stories of residents who had found comfort in the spiritual library, Keanu listening with genuine interest. As their conversation wound down, Walter asked a question that had clearly been on his mind. "Can I ask you something personal? You don't have to answer." Keanu nodded, open to the question. "That day, when you spent all that time searching for my Bible, it seemed like you really understood what it meant to me. Like maybe you've found comfort in faith too during hard times." Keanu was quiet for a moment, considering. "I've had my share of loss," he said finally. "And yes, I've found that spiritual texts, not just the Bible, but writings from many traditions, offer a kind of wisdom you can't find elsewhere, a perspective beyond our immediate suffering." Walter nodded, understanding in his eyes. Margaret used to say that faith doesn't remove the pain, it just helps you carry it with grace. "She sounds like a wise woman," Keanu said. "I wish I could have met her." "In a way you have," Walter replied, patting his restored Bible. "Through her words, through what she left behind. That's why this meant so much to me." He looked around at the busy shelter, at the peaceful corner they had created within it. "And now, her wisdom is helping others too." As Keanu prepared to leave, Monica approached with news. The shelter's board of directors had been so impressed by the impact of the spiritual library that they were implementing changes in policies around personal possessions, creating more flexible storage solutions, and most importantly, training staff to recognize and respect items of personal significance to residents. It all started with one act of kindness, she told Keanu, with you seeing the value in what others dismissed as clutter. Keanu shook his head, deflecting the praise. It started with Walter and Margaret's love, with words written in margins. I just helped preserve it. At the entrance, Keanu paused for a final goodbye to Walter. The older man pressed something into his hand, a small handmade bookmark with a quote written in careful lettering. Kindness is the language the deaf can hear and the blind can see. Mark Twain. Margaret's favorite quote, Walter explained. She believed kindness could bridge any divide. So do I. Keanu thanked him, tucking the bookmark carefully into his jacket. As he turned to go, Walter called after him one last time. You know, in all the stories about you online, they talk about your generosity, your humble nature, but they miss something important. What's that? Keanu asked. Walter smiled, his eyes bright with the spark that had returned to them. They miss that true kindness isn't about what you give, it's about truly seeing someone. You saw me when I was invisible. That's the real miracle. Keanu nodded, touched by the insight. Take care of yourself, Walter, and everyone else here too. I will, Walter promised, and I'll keep your secret about the landfill. He winked, though it would make quite a story. Keanu laughed, waving as he departed. Outside, he paused to look back at the shelter, not the most impressive building, not the most elegant solution to homelessness, but a place where, in the midst of struggle, people were seen, valued, and their sacred connections preserved. 6 months later, Hope Harbor's model of respecting spiritual diversity while maintaining resident dignity was being adopted by shelters in 3 neighboring states. Walter, now officially employed as the shelter's spiritual library coordinator, had started a podcast sharing stories of faith, resilience, and wisdom from people society often overlooked. And in Keanu's wallet, a handmade bookmark traveled with him around the world, a reminder that our most valuable possessions are not things but connections. To loved ones, to meaning, to the divine however we understand it, and to each other. In a world that often measures worth by celebrity, wealth, or power, the real transformations happen quietly, through simple acts of seeing what truly matters to another person. Through one man's search through a landfill for a tattered Bible filled with a woman's handwritten legacy of love. If you were touched by this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Share in the comments a time when someone saw value in something important to you when others didn't. Remember, true kindness isn't just about giving. It's about truly seeing the worth in what others might overlook.